Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today on the pod, we're going to be talking with Ian Boswell. He is a former World Tour pro cyclist. He does pro gravel racing now, amongst a number of other things, working for Wahoo among them. Really awesome guy. Good story today. We talk about obviously his professional cycling career. We talk about gardening, bush hogging. What else did we talk about? Family, religion a little bit. Nothing outside of the ordinary that I hope by this point you guys would expect from me. So thanks for being here. If you are listening on any of the podcast platforms such as Spotify or Apple Podcasts, if you could follow or subscribe, that really helps continue to grow and push the podcast out there. So that would mean a lot to me. If you could comment, review as well, that would be really helpful. Most people that listen actually don't do those things. So thank you so much for getting plugged in. And also check out the show notes for all of Ian's stuff. Check out the show notes for if you want to support the podcast through some purchasing of the socks that have this logo on them, and sign up for the newsletter actually, because the newsletter is something I've really actually been working on and releasing now. We're going on by the time this comes out, I think our 6th or 7th one, where I give a little rundown of what's going on in the past week and the lessons, big 3 takeaways that I've taken from those conversations. So thanks for being here. Really appreciate you guys. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to Ian Boswell. Slash paint.
Oh boy, yeah.
Unique.
Yeah, it's not by design. We live in an old farmhouse. Our house was built in like 1785, so it's 250 years old.
That's phenomenal.
And so we've like painted, like, I would say we're working on it. We're never not working on it. It's just like a continual project. But this was like one wall and there was like different layers of wallpaper. And rather than just like paint over the whole thing, like, oh, it's kind of cool to show like just the different styles that were here at one point. Cause there's all sorts of different, different iterations over the last 200 plus years. So,
yeah.
It looks like I'm in a,
yeah, super old. Like it's not drywall, right? Like, is it like plastered walls or is it just go back to?
Yeah, it's lath and plaster.
That's cool.
We found all sorts of, we redid our bedroom a couple years ago, and like the wall insulation was just like stacked bricks. There's like, that was the insulation. This is one of the few walls in the house where the lath and plaster is not cracked. So,
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it just happens to be where my desk is set up. So yeah, it's a wormhole, this house. Every time you take down a wall or do any sort of project, you find something you didn't want to find. But
yeah, no kidding. Well, where are you at right now? Like, where's this house located?
We're in northern Vermont. So, like maybe 60 miles south of Canada and then like 15 miles from New Hampshire. So kind of northeast corner of Vermont. So
it was built by some of the very first, I guess, like legit settlers who were coming over and making stuff happen.
Yeah, it's a pretty darn big house to be built 250 years ago. They've got a big
history.
barn.
Do you know the history of like who lived there?
Yeah, it was built by the Martin family. Elijah Martin built it, and it was like a tavern at one point. It's been all sorts of various things over its iteration. But yeah, I mean, thankfully there's like pretty good historical kind of archives at the town office and the historic society in town, so you can kind of go back and see who lived there and what it was at various times.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, I could talk about that stuff all day. I used to help build houses, but like the old houses, the way that they used to do them, to be able to stand the test of time for 200 plus years, they don't make houses really like that anymore, honestly.
No, we're just doing some siding. We just we were going to do some painting, and then we realized that this old siding was like not in good shape. But then we like started scraping it, it starts to like crumble, and then we like took a couple pieces of siding off, and there's no water barrier behind the siding. So I'm like, oh, maybe we should put water barrier up. But then like part of the reason these old houses are still standing is like they breathe so, especially in New England, where like the humidity and this changing of the seasons is so extreme. Mm-hmm. It's like if you put a water barrier up, or you can like prevent the house from like breathing proper. Like there's nothing about this house is sealed or tight. But like maybe that's what's kept it in the shape that it's in, is that like it does swell and expand
contract,
exactly. Yeah.
Do you have a history, like a background in doing handyman type of work, like to remodel a house? Like that's a lot of learning, a lot of YouTube if you don't have a background.
No. Part of it is, we have like some friends who, help, but I mean, a lot of it's just like necessity of living where we do. Vermont's a pretty rural state. There's not a whole lot of, there's not a lot of new construction. So it means there's not a lot of, contractors.
Sure.
And some of it's just like, you just figure out as you go, the amount of like plumbing projects that I've figured out, Even just
Yeah.
the other day, of course, our front door, just like, I don't know why this year decided to do it, but just with summer, it just like shifted on the hinges, just, it's swelling or whatnot.
Yeah.
So the door just like hasn't been shutting. So it's like, oh, I guess I'll, figure out how to reset a door. Just like, are you really going to
Yeah.
call someone to come out and do that? It's like
Yeah.
you'd probably wait a couple months to get someone to come out, and then you're going to
Mm.
spend, $1,000 for something that I can figure out in a couple frustrating hours and a YouTube video. So a
Yeah.
lot of it's just like, yeah, figure it out.
Yeah, that speaks a lot to your mentality, though. I mean, not everybody has that same, the way that I guess they approach things. They're not going to try to call somebody. They want to do it themselves. That's a rarer trait. Where do you think that came from?
I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is like, uh, I mean, I think, as I said, I think some of it is like just being resourceful.
Hmm.
Maybe some of it's like being frugal. Like I can figure this out. And I think
Yeah.
my dad very much has that mentality of like, I think also I don't know how old you are, but like our generation,
Hmm.
we also didn't grow up like learning a lot of these skills. My dad, he's a nurse, but like he grew up and they had like a shop class, an automotive, like he doesn't,
Yeah.
he does his own oil changes. He fixes like everything himself. And for whatever reason, like our generation, like maybe we're better at computers or technology, but like,
Maybe.
most of my
Yeah.
friends, we take our cars and they get oil changed, or someone rotates your tires, or, you call someone to blow out your sprinklers. They're all pretty easy things to do.
Mm.
One, you need the equipment for them. So like slowly I've accumulated, power tools and compressors and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I think it's also rewarded to be able to
Mm.
do it yourself. It is frustrating. And I think, kind of where I'm at now in my life, where I'm still racing and, exercising to a high degree. But largely I've like kind of mastered that side of my life. Like I kind of know where my limits are now.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people come to me and ask for help. Hey, I need a training plan, or how would you prepare for this, or bike equipment. And it's like been a fun kind of role reversal to be like on the opposite side of that. Like, I don't know how to do this.
Mm.
Whether it's like I borrowed a friend's excavator last year and blew a hydraulic hose, and I'm like, oh, like it was just a
Oh
mess.
yeah.
Just like I'm like,
No
okay, I
kidding.
guess I'll like figure out how to replace a hydraulic hose. And like it was the most like frustrating and dirty process. I've just, hydraulic fluid everywhere. Like I was just
Hmm.
covered in it. Um, but sure enough, I figured it out. When it happens again, I'll know what to do. So it's like learning these skills. And I think just not being from Vermont, surrounded by a lot of individuals who have those skills, they grew up on a dairy farm, or, just they had to, learn those skills at a young age because that's the requirement of living here. So trying to like catch up on time, like, hey, how do I as
Yeah.
quickly as possible like gain these skills?
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. Just really quick. So hydraulic lines. Um, I was bush hogging with my father-in-law, or for my father-in-law, and he didn't have really good brakes on this tractor, and I got going backwards downhill and kind of freaked out and was like, "Oh my goodness, how do I brake?" Anyway, the bush hog itself went up a tree and somehow
Oh,
grabbed the PTO, grabbed the hydraulic lines and like ripped them in half, and hydraulic fluid went
oh,
everywhere. But I got to experience a little bit of what you're talking about. Yeah, that
oh
hydraulic
no.
fluid mess and scaring myself
Oh
to death.
boy. Yeah. Where do you live?
So I live now in Northern California, but I grew up in North Carolina, and that happened in
Oh, nice.
Tennessee. So I'm from the
Cool.
East Coast, but I've been out here for now a year or so, so not too
Yeah.
terribly
Where are
long.
you in NorCal?
Reading, so it's like four
Oh,
hours,
sweet.
5 hours south of Bend. Yeah, so not
Yep.
too far
Yeah. I
from
used
your
to, so I
home.
actually spent quite a few years in Chico. So I know
Yeah.
Redding area pretty well. It's awesome. Yeah, my dad's over in Brookings, Oregon now,
Okay.
and my mom's still in Bend, and we're coming out in October.
Mm.
My dad's just going to come up to Bend because Brookings is like the hardest place in the country to get
To
to.
get to,
It seems like.
like nestled in some like holler between some mountains or something. Lots of dirt
Yeah,
roads.
exactly. Yeah,
That's awesome. Man, there's so many things I could jump into, but I guess first thing I should say before getting in too deep is thank you so much for taking the time
yeah,
to come on my humble podcast. It's an honor to get to meet you. As I was doing a little of the research and just looking at some of your friends, I was like, oh, well, I know him who knows him. So this should be a fun
yeah.
conversation. So thanks for making the time, man.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit just by some of the things you shared, I think, but I would love to hear from your perspective to kind of open it up. Who is Ian?
Oh boy, big question. I mean, I guess going back, so I grew up in Bend, Oregon, which has definitely become like an endurance kind of hotbed of pro athletes, triathlon, running. So I was born there in 91 when it was like still a relatively small town.
Hmm.
The mill had recently closed down, and my dad was a professional triathlete in the 80s, and my mom was an athlete running, mountain biking. And yeah, my mom went to Oregon State and then moved to Bend, and my dad was a pro triathlete in NorCal and moved up to Bend. He looked at Boulder and stuff, but that was too big for him at the time.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, my parents met in Bend. I was born there and raised, and my mom still lives in the house that I grew up in. Um, so being from a town that kind of has, outdoor rec easily accessible is always kind of drawn to it. I played American sports, football and basketball and all that. But I was also always, I guess, exposed to and like aware of endurance sports, whether it's triathlon, running, cycling. Um, and once I started, was able to like learn to ride a bike and then fit on like my mom's road bike. I really just fell in love with bike racing. And, that's really kind of like that's defined my life to a large degree is bike racing. And it's crazy that I'm sitting here now 34 years old, and have raced my bike around the world. And kind of at a young age, when I was coming up, the early 2000s, it was kind of during the Lance era of cycling in the US, and there was this huge, really American kind of draw to professional road cycling in
Hmm.
Europe. We were watching the tour on TV, and Lance had come to Bend to do the Cascade Cycling Classic in '98. Um, so there was like really a growing market of road racing was super healthy in the U.S., especially in Oregon. The OBRA, Oregon Bicycle Racing Association, put on like tons of races, and they were super affordable for juniors, and there was a really competitive field of young riders racing. Um, and I did well in basketball and stuff as well. I was pretty tall for my age through high school. Um, but like with anything in school sports, you're also dependent on the team around you.
Sure.
And I just felt like for whatever reason, I always was like very motivated to like improve and get better. And I just found in endurance sports and cycling that I could really like get myself to the best I could possibly be. And like it wasn't something that I was really relying on a team to do. I could get home
Mm.
from school and go ride 1 hour or 3 hours. Um, in high school sports, we'd go meet at the basketball court and play for 15 minutes and then mess around and have
Yeah.
snacks and then
Yeah.
not really
Yeah.
play much basketball.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's really sports have kind of defined my life. Now I'm working full time at Wahoo Fitness, where I've been for 5 years now. Um, I still very much feel like a kid, playing and just, riding my bike around. I do a bit of running, but I've got, married, have two kids.
Hmm.
We live in northern Vermont. I met my wife in Bend. She's from Vermont in 2015, and then we moved out here. At the time, I was actually still living over in Europe, racing bikes. So I lived in Europe for 8 years, racing bikes professionally on a British team, and then a kind of a Swiss Russian team.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did all the Grand Tours, the Vuelta, Tour de France, Giro, yeah, some World Championships, and then in 2019, had a pretty bad crash on the road and had a concussion, and decided to not race bikes, professional road cycling anymore. And I
Hmm.
kind of very much at the time thought that was the end of my racing career. I knew I'd always ride bikes, but I took a long period off of racing. I crashed in April and didn't race again the rest of that year. That's when I kind of transitioned into my role at Wahoo Fitness. And oddly, from that moment on, gravel racing was kind of exploding in the US. And then we hit the pandemic. So I went like, almost 2 years without racing a bike. And then all of a sudden kind of jumped into a couple of gravel races and did really well. And like strangely got like pulled back into the competitive side of bike racing. All the while, the previous 2 years I've been still riding, and it's always fun to go fast, but not
Yeah.
really finding the competitiveness of bunch racing.
Mm.
So since 2021, I've been splitting my time between family, work, and racing gravel bikes.
Yeah. So your identity has had to shift a few times, it sounds like, in how people see you, but also how you see yourself. If you were to identify kind of who you are now outside of those different sports, maybe some of the values that sit with you that you've carried throughout the different phases of your life, what do you think those would be?
Um, I don't know, man. And maybe part of it of who I like see myself as now is defined by sport. I think especially as an endurance athlete, you're self-reliant. I think especially being an
Mm.
American who is racing in Europe, there's a lot you're figuring out on your own. a lot of my counterparts in Europe, they lived at home until they were 28, or, they bought a house next door to their parents. And I was from age, you know, 19, 20, I was like living over in Europe by myself. So like having that independence and kind of like self-reliance has always been really important to me. Um, and also just like, I guess how I present myself has become something that's, whether it's, showing up at races and representing your sponsors well, or even with my job at Wahoo, being responsive to athletes and making sure that they're looked after,
Mm,
how I would like to be looked after. Not saying I'm not looked after by the brands I work with, but
sure,
like
sure.
I understand if an athlete has a race in 2 days and they can't figure out something on their computer, or they need a pair of pedals, it's like they email me and like it's not really an emergency. Like they'll be fine. Like the world's not going to end if they don't figure out how to see this data screen. But I understand for that athlete in that moment, that is a big deal.
Yeah.
So just making sure that I'm giving them the attention they want. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess where I'm at now, it's like very much a case of having this wealth of experience and knowledge, and like at some point, I'm going to slow down and not be as fast. But like, how do I share all the lessons I've learned over my career, both positive and negative, with, other athletes, especially young athletes, is something that really kind of inspires me, because it's a hard journey. I mean, to get to the top of any sport,
Mm,
it's not easy. And I look back now at, my career and like made a lot of, a lot of mistakes. And then I did a podcast with the pro cyclist David Miller a couple of years ago, and he's like, "Yeah, that's just how sport is. Like, you don't know how to do it until you're done. Like, once
mm,
you're done with it, and you take a couple of months out, you look back, you're like, oh, that actually wasn't as hard as I didn't need to make it as hard as it was, but you can't see that in the moment.
yeah.
Um, yeah, that's just probably how life works as well.
Yeah. Good stuff. Do you think that as you like started down this journey that you had the backing and support of your parents, like when you started to get into this and think like, oh, maybe I can do this full time. Did you have the wind at your back in that regard?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think just having parents that also knew about endurance sports, as simple as like having a road bike or, equipment. As I said, Ben was at the time, even still back in the, late 90s, early 2000s, was like an endurance community. Um, so yeah, whether it was my parents or just other folks in the community, having the support of, having people to ride with, or, local races, or being able to borrow a pair of, time trial wheels to go to a race. A tremendous amount of support. And I think that's like a
Mm,
huge reason and kind of part of the success was that, you know, when everything's going well, of course, it's easy to continue, but there's times when, you're not going well, or you've crashed, or, cycling's also really expensive. I mean, I've got two kids now, and, they're too young to have picked up a sport yet, but,
once they
my
do.
mom and dad would, yeah, yeah, my mom and dad would drive me, 3 hours over to Portland for a 10-mile time trial. And then we'd get in the car and drive home, 6 hours in the car for I don't know, 20-minute time trial. I'm like, what were they thinking? Like I would,
Yeah.
I guess now I would just put my kid on Zwift or something
Yeah.
and tell them to go race. But no, a tremendous amount of support from my parents.
Yeah.
Even still. And I think, it's yeah, I think just having parents that also kind of understood the sport and the sacrifice and kind of the dedication that goes into it was a huge part of just yeah, kind of getting to where I got to.
Yeah. So along that journey, as well, whenever you said you were doing, football, cross country, basketball, was there a time in your mind when you decided like, oh, cycling's my thing, and oh, I think I'm actually good at this? Was there like a defining moment that led you to start making life choices that would lead you down that path fully?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was successful pretty early on. It was the same with basketball. I just was early. I hit puberty at a younger age than a lot of my friends. So I was 6 feet tall when I was 14 years old. So
Nice. I was 4 feet tall.
um, yeah, yes, I went to nationals. They happened to be in Salt Lake City when I was 16. Um, so we drove out there, and I did really well at nationals. I think the first year I was in the front group. I had some mechanicals, but the second year I won the criterium uh, and the time trial. And then I broke a chain in the road race because my dad was a 80s weight weenie and like tried to cut the chain, and it was like it was a hollow pin chain that you shouldn't have cut. You should have like replaced the links.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I guess I knew from then that I was I guess had like the ability, and like that's when I started to think like, all right, maybe I should pursue this.
Mm,
Um, but even then, I'd still play basketball in the winter, living in Bend, at the time, it wasn't really the sport as a whole, endurance sports. I think it was still like a generation of like being a multi-sport athlete. And, the indoor training equipment wasn't what it is now. And,
Yeah.
Bend does have a winter. So it's not like I was riding all winter. I'd kind of, race from, I don't know, April through September, and then, go play basketball or cross country ski or snowboard. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think every kid has like a dream, and I think just going back to kind of seeing Lance win the tours, I'm like, oh, if he can do it, he's from Texas. Ben's a way more,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
way more athletic community than somewhere in Texas. Surely I'll win the tour one day. So I think it was always a dream. And then I think slowly just like, winning races locally and then, nationally, kind of like you kind of take these small steps that you don't really see where it's going, but they're incremental enough that like you're still on this trajectory of yeah, finding that pathway. And I think probably the biggest choice I made was after graduating high school to not go to college to pursue professional cycling. So I moved down to Chico, California, and I did take a few classes at Butte College, which is a JC down there, and I took just kind of yeah BS
Minimum.
classes to
Yeah.
yeah to tell my parents I was going to school, but
Yeah.
I was like mostly riding and training. Um, and that was a time, like my grandma was like, oh, you need to go to school. And of course, like now when I go see her, I have to go around the retirement home and, oh, this is my son. He was a professional bike racer. It's like completely opposite of what she said 20 years ago when I chose to not go to college to
Mm,
race bikes.
yeah. Well, and so you continued on that path. You went to Europe. I'm sure that that was difficult from, I mean, a younger age, learning to survive and be, I guess, resilient, independent on your own. Did you ever get homesick and think, ah, maybe this isn't for me?
Um, I mean, not really homesick. I mean, I also, so my junior year of high school, I also did a Rotary exchange in Belgium.
Oh, cool.
And so I think that like taught me, like, it wasn't one of those things I did to like prepare for the future, but like oddly, it did
It
prepare
did
me in a lot of
prepare.
ways. And
Yeah.
I learned how to speak French and kind of, the family that I was placed with was very, um, yeah, lenient on my like where I was.
Hmm.
So I was like, I kind of like gained these skills of like being a kid in a big city when I was 16 years old. So I matured a lot at that point. I think I missed home and I guess my early years of when I was at Team Sky, not necessarily missed home, but like the ease of preparing to be a pro athlete on my own. Prior to living in Europe, I was in a familiar environment and I knew the climbs and I knew, if you go to the grocery store, like what foods you want to get. Um, you also have like a social life outside of, bike racing. I think there was times when I was in France in those early years when, if you didn't have teammates around at the time, it's like, cool, I don't really have too many French friends yet, so I really would just like ride and then go back to my apartment. And I still think about this a lot now. Like, I don't know what I did with my time. I wasn't watching YouTube. I didn't have Netflix. I didn't read many books, and I
Mm.
was maybe training at most like 20 to 25 hours a week. I'm like, what did I do with my time? I can't like go back to that moment and be like, what was I mean, I could have gotten a couple of PhD degrees over the course of 8 years, just sitting in an apartment
Yeah.
training, 30 hours a week. And the rest of the time, I don't know what I mean, you'd hang out with friends and stuff, but,
Sure.
um,
I think that honestly,
yeah,
just to interject really quick, like, I think that that's something that. So I'm 33. I think you're like a year older than me. I just had my 33rd birthday at the beginning of this month, like just 8 days ago or 7 days ago or something like that. But to be able to sit with yourself in silence or to be able to just kind of contemplate or not have something coming in at you the whole time, I feel like that's a skill now, as weird as that sounds, to be able to do that because we've kind of trained ourselves to be ADHD sort of with like the
hmm
constant, oh, what's next? What's next? I want to find that hit, so it's interesting. I wonder how that actually helped you. And also with what you were saying earlier, Ben had a winter, so you kind of did other things. One thing that I see, so I'm not a professional athlete. I observe professional athletes, and it's especially in triathlon. It's like, all right, Kona happens, whatever. It's like, all right, I'm gonna take my off season, and it's like kind of ish 2 weeks, and then it's like, oh
yeah.
yeah, my off season's here. I'm charting up again. And I've talked to people like Mark Allen. They're like, yeah, people train too much. They should take more time off. And I wonder how that helped you like develop as an individual, but also as an athlete as you got older.
Yeah, I mean, I think that time away has always been important. I mean, it's interesting now we're speaking the middle end of September. Like I feel like my body's also developed this like cycle where it's like now like I'm kind of like, I went out for a short ride this morning, but like I just naturally like kind of I don't say lose motivation. And I
Yeah.
think yeah, and maybe partially it's like, your body can sense that like the sun is lower in the sky and it's not as
Hmm.
warm and like I tend to like, sit
Hibernate.
around and not, yeah, like I've been
Yeah.
eating way more food and exercising less. And it's just like my body's in this cycle of like taking a step back. Um, I mean, I also like, I think in sport in general, like as I've gotten older, what I love most is like the process. Like I really
Mm.
love the training and like kind of that feeling of like getting better. Um, and so I think to a degree, almost like sometimes I like self-sabotage myself to like get really unfit to then like have that like maybe that hit of like getting fit again.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that's something that I've like maybe it's just like myself or like I don't know, some weird cycle that I'm on. But yeah, it's something that I kind of find every year this time of year.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, even like the mental side of it. So, and this is going to be kind of funny to compare this, and people are going to laugh at me. But when I was in like high school going into college, I played a ton of video games. Okay. So, like, I was
Mhm.
big into like the Halo world and whatnot. And even with that stuff, if I was playing it constantly, and would take a break for like a week, even just from a mental perspective, you come back way sharper and just, I don't know. It's like when there's so much coming in all the time and your body's processing it from a mental perspective, from a physical perspective, to even a spiritual perspective, like to be able to have the silence for a little while and then kind of let all of the stuff settle, I guess, into the foundation so you can have a rock solid something else whenever you're ready to build to the next level. Yeah, I think there's
Yeah.
something to that.
Yeah, no, I found that when I was living in Belgium. I was there for, I don't know, 9 or 10 months during the school year. And like, I was learning French because I was living with a family that spoke French. And then I went back to the US for the summer once the school year ended and came back to Belgium that autumn with the national team to do some racing and met up with my family. And they're like, wow, your French has gotten so much better. You've been practicing. I'm like, no, I think I finally just had time to like get out of this environment, absorb it all. And then
Yeah.
it's like, that like almost like, it's like training. It's like you have to rest to get better.
Yeah.
And I had rest from that environment to like come back to it. And actually my French had improved by not speaking French.
Yeah. No, there's definitely you got to rest. So for you, as you went into, you raced for, I want to say 5 or 6 like high level, world level tour type of teams. What was it like? Kind of, you said growing up, oh, Lance is from Texas. I'm from Bend. I can do that. You have like this vision and expectation of what it looks like to be a world tour cyclist, and then you get there. You've experienced it at this point. Kind of compare and contrast to me for me what it is that you saw when you started to what it actually is, now that you're kind of
Yeah. I
sunset through
mean,
that.
once I was, and as I said, like the steps were so gradual that like you kind of just end up there. And I
Mm.
think from a young age, like my goal and like kind of I think when athletes and individuals, whether it's sport or business, like you set goals, like you set 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, whatever it may be. My goal was always to make it to the world tour. And that was kind of like whether I had goals throughout the season as a junior or under 23, those goals all led to like riding the tour, being on a Tour de France team. Um, and then once I got to the world tour and signed with Team Sky in 2013 was the first year. I never really reset my goals. And I
I'm
kind of,
here.
I'd put in all the work to like get there. Then you sign a big contract and you're actually like, I mean, I was 21 years old and had like a big contract, I was like, making actual real money,
Hmm.
living in an apartment in Nice, like kind of everything, all my dreams had come true. And I got there and kind of floundered for a couple of years. I was all of a
Mm.
sudden living that life, but not, I don't say not putting in the work, but like kind of forgot what got me to that level, forgot like
Yeah.
I don't say the hunger went away. So I was still trying, but I was like putting effort into the wrong things,
Mm.
rather than like thinking about how I was going to do it, rather than actually go out and execute. Um, and that took like, yeah, thankfully I signed a 3 year contract with Team Sky. So the first 2 years were, I had some good events and good races here and there, but not to the level that the team signed me on, or not, I guess, the promise that I had showed the years prior.
Mm.
Um, and then my third year on that team, it was kind of a do or die situation. It's like, cool, I'm either going to re-sign with this team or, sign with another team, where that's kind of it. I was kind of hitting that age where like you needed to then perform. And yeah, kind of, for lack of a better term, like got my shit together. By that point I'd been living in Europe full time for 2 years. And so my home life was stable. I kind of like, knew what I was doing off the bike, and was then like finally able to put more, let's say, focus towards the actual racing and performance, and kind of leveling up to a degree to what was required of me at that level. I mean, I think in sport in general, I don't know triathlon as well, but you know athletes now at such a young age are so dialed. I think even a decade ago in professional cycling, there was like kind of a slow ramp to like success.
Mm,
People who were 22, 23, 24 weren't really expected. You're still kind of learning. And now we see athletes come in at 19 years old and they're like, cool, I already know how to eat
yeah.
like a pro, train like, I mean, they're already at their essentially their peak. Just whether that's the internet or podcasts, like they already have all the knowledge that used to take, time and really,
Yeah. The learning
a
curve was more
decade to learn.
steady.
Now they have it, by the time they're 15 years old, they know kind of all the, I don't want to say the hacks of the trade, but
Mm,
they've got their nutrition dialed, they've got their equipment dialed, they've been to a wind tunnel, they've, working with the best coaches, they're doing testing, which used to kind of be like reserved for elite sport. And now it's like, every athlete out on the streets got some, special coach or some monitor, and
yeah.
everyone's pretty
What's your
dialed this day and
CDA?
age.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. How do you think that that affects, or have you observed any changes in how that affects the longevity of of an athlete in the sport?
Yeah, no, I mean, just being someone who's like still pretty connected to the sport, whether it's friends that are racing or following the sport or podcasts. There's been a lot of, I guess, a couple of years ago there was a lot of talk about these young athletes like most likely burning out young, and I don't think that's the case. I think that these athletes, they know what they're signing up for. And I and kind of back to my time at Sky, I really hit professional cycling at this like transitional window.
Hmm.
So the generation prior to me, they trained hard, but there was also this element of, especially European cycling, of, you know, kind of party boys, like, hey, you race hard, but you go out and party afterwards. I mean, I don't know how much you follow cycling, but like Jan Ulrich would put on like 22 kilos, like 45, 50 pounds in the off season.
That's
Um,
insane.
so some of these athletes kind of like trickled into my generation. So there was like this, hey, we like, we go to camp, whatever, we train hard, but there's also like, we're going to go have a beer, or we finish a race, we'll go out to some clubs. I guess my generation forward was like power meters and, glucose monitor, like all this kind of where we're at now in
Yeah,
sport.
very data
And I kind of
driven.
like, yeah, so I kind of like saw both sides of it. For example, when I was living in Europe, we, trained with, all the best riders were living in Monaco. So we would go out and do a 4 or 5 hour ride, but we'd stop in a coffee shop and have a cappuccino and a sandwich. And all, there was a lifestyle associated with professional cycling where it was like, cool, like why wouldn't you stop for a sandwich? It's like you have all day and that's all you have to do is ride your bike. And there was a couple of young American riders who lived in Nice who were maybe like 4 years younger than me. I'd invite them to come ride with, Chris Froome and Gilbert and Richie Porte, like some of the best riders in the world at the time. And they're like, oh no, I don't want to, like, I've got my own training plan to do. I'm like, what? You don't
Do
want to
you
go
know what
like,
I just said to you?
yeah. Yeah. I was like you're literally going to go ride with the best athletes in the world and you want to go ride by yourself. Um, and that was just a case of like the mind shift and like the kind of the change of the sport is, for me, the high of the sport was like, yeah, we ride hard, but we stop. And we, there's this balance of professionalism, but like life and like this kind of, I don't even know how you would
Yeah,
describe
to
it, but
be
like this
fluid.
European,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. The perk of being a pro athlete is, yeah, we live in France and we can stop at an amazing bakery and have a good pastry and a coffee and then keep riding.
yeah,
For this new generation, that same like whatever dopamine hit is like getting back and downloading their training file. That's what they get their hit. Oh, I did this new power record. Oh, my coach gave me this workout and I hit it to the T.
yeah.
Um, so I don't think that the burnout rate is going to be as high as people think, because that's just the psyche of the athlete in this day and age. Is like
Mm.
the numbers are really what's the motivating factor to them.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because if I observe sports like Formula One, like to be the best and the fastest, you have to be really, I would say it's like, it seems to be, I don't know these people personally, so I'd love to maybe interview them and kind of get into it, but it seems like it's driven 90% by the data and then 10% gut and emotion. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an argument to be made maybe against that, but for what's happening in triathlon, like I see the same thing, and seems to be in pro cycling as well. Like, yeah, it's very data driven, but I feel like for the longevity of just like the health, the emotional well being, there is a trade off that you may lose some of that happiness inside if you're only going for that. Because then once you get there, like you said, when you experienced, oh, I got to the world level team, a World Tour team, and then it's like you feel a little lost. And I hear that from Olympians too, even winning gold, even, and they're like, oh, now what? And so it's like
Yeah.
if you don't have that other side of the training and the lifestyle of stopping in for the coffee shop or going on a bike with Chris Froome just because he has wisdom, or and maybe I won't get my
Hmm.
greatest training. If the mind is healthy, it seems like that would bring the highest level of potential performance. But I'm just me. I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say. I mean from the triathlon world, I know this Norwegian crew.
The hype
You know,
train. Yep.
they dominate, but they also like they're in this little environment where they're all like together all the time, and so they have like enough of that socialization to probably keep it entertaining.
Yeah.
Um,
Good characters.
it'd
Yeah.
be interesting to see in 5 years if two of them stop racing, or one of them, and like what then happens if you then are on your own, you're not being pushed
Mm,
constantly.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it really is a kind of I mean, it's a fascinating time in professional sport because there are so many athletes like, doing it so well. And, even when I look back to when I was racing, like there was a pretty, over the course of, or the whole peloton, there was a pretty, you know, pretty steep drop off after the top like 50,
Hmm.
just as far as like commitment and altitude camps and,
Yeah.
all the kind of the fine details. And now everyone's doing everything, whether it's, measuring everything, and still there's like a handful of people that are just so much better. And similar in triathlon, like, you look at any, Ironman Nice was last week, and it's like, if you had $1,000 to put on the Norwegians, you probably would put it on them. It's
And
like,
that,
it's
yeah.
unlikely if they don't win.
Yeah.
Um, which is similar in cycling at the moment with, Pogacar and, a handful of others. It's like, if you had the money to put on them, you would be stupid not to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm curious also to know because you've been on Bissell, Sky, I think Alpecin. I can't name all the other ones.
Mhm.
I'm still pretty new in this stuff, but what makes in your eyes, like what was in the terms of just atmosphere, training environment, getting out there, the community, what was the worst team and what was the best team? Are you
Oh
allowed to say
boy.
that, by the way? You have an
Yeah,
NDA?
no, I can say. I mean, I think the worst, the least enjoyable team was probably the last one that I was on was Katusha, and that was the last. So I was on there for the last 2 years of my road career. Um, there was a lot of pressure. The team wasn't performing. It was a real kind of hodgepodge of riders. We had, I guess I was the only American, but we had, some Australians, some Russians, some huge German influence. It really didn't have like an identity.
Mm,
And sometimes that works really well within a team. Like you have such an international team. There's a really good culture. Um, the contrary to that, I think the best teams, Team Sky, obviously kind of in the heyday, 2013 through 16, 17. Um, and then I guess the junior team I was on, the Hot Tubes development team, where you just had a real sense of, uh, camaraderie, and you had fun, as much fun off the bike as you did on the
on the
bike.
bike.
And I think, Sky, Dave Brailsford, who was the GM at the time, has written plenty of books about, kind of sports management and whatnot. And I think that he really kind of got the best out of everyone. I think creating that culture of success. I mean, part of it, the team was just winning, we were winning pretty much every race we
Everything.
went to. So that like just breeds kind of more success, and just the level of confidence that I guess we had, was so high going into races that winning's kind of just like a byproduct of the fun you're having
Mm,
off the bike. Um, I mean, I think that relates to, the business world as well, like that culture, which is something you can't buy. You have to like create from within, whether that's, you know, success, or just like, having the right group of people around you makes a huge difference.
mm.
And, some teams nail it on the head and, are super successful, and other teams try to try to create it and can just never quite get their hands on it.
Yeah, it seems interesting. Like there's this mountain of confidence, like you're trying to scale, and to get there is really difficult. But then you get to the top, and you're like, "Oh, I'm here." But there's also this precipice. If you go too far, you're overconfident, becomes cocky. It's like a level of being humble is required in order to maintain that atmosphere of, I don't know, acceptance. I would imagine amongst other teams, other teammates, maybe even your enemies over there. Whatever. It seems like most people are really good
Yeah.
friends, but to be able to maintain that is not an easy thing to do.
No, I mean, and it's easier to get to the top than to stay on the top. And I don't know how much you follow professional cycling now, but Team Sky has become Ineos, and they're kind of on that
Hmm.
downward trajectory where they, for the longest while, still had the confidence, but didn't have the performance to kind of back it up, and were kind of like caught flat, like other teams had kind of caught
Yeah.
up to them.
Yeah.
Um, And yeah, you kind of always need to be pushing the limits of, culture, equipment, nutrition. Like it's easy once you get to the top to become
Yeah.
complacent.
Yeah, I think it's a natural thing too, and it's honestly probably good that there's this cycle of the teams over time because whether it's Formula One sport or kingdoms of the world, like there are these ebbs and flows, and sometimes you got all the pieces in front of you, and you think, "Oh, I got it all figured out. Here's my book,"
Yeah.
and then you try to bring out that book, and it's like you said, well, if you don't have the right people, have the right connections, it tends to kind of fall by the wayside. I would imagine be very difficult to
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the crazy thing with endurance sports is that it's always evolving and changing.
Mm.
At the time, when I was at Sky, there was this huge low carb fad, and like we were kind of at the cutting edge of that. And that was, kind of, I don't want to say that our secret, but that was like our, you know, that's what everyone thought we were doing that was so advanced is, all the riders are so like fat adapted and how are they doing it? And like it's a polar opposite now. And like I'm like, oh, it's no question that everyone's going way faster on,
Yeah.
100 plus grams of carbs an hour. It makes a lot of sense. And I do that now in my own, endeavors. And I'm like, oh wow, I
Yeah.
feel good every day. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah.
So, what have you learned about leadership in these positions? Because I imagine when you first came in, like you weren't necessarily in a position of being a leader, but as you've gained notoriety and friends and experience, like even with those you were riding with in the peloton, what did you learn about leadership?
I mean, I think actions speak louder than words. I think it's like a testament that's older than time. I just think that like, I mean, I think communication is key. I think like whether it's, saying things at the right time, but also not saying things when it's not needed. And that was like one of the
Discretion.
biggest differences between, Sky and Katusha. When I look at, kind of the heads of the team, whether it's riders or, kind of general managers and directors, athletes are in, if you get to the highest level of sport, you're motivated. You don't need to be like, this whole strategy of like, oh, let's beat them down to get them motivated. Like that doesn't really work at the highest level of sport because you're already there. You're already, giving everything you have. And, for in my instance, you're already living, 7,000 miles from home. You're already making the sacrifice. I think it's like building up athletes in the right way to, yeah, create that camaraderie of success. And I think,
Mm.
there were times when I rode with people like Chris Froome or like a sprinter like Marcel Kittel. And I think it's giving riders like or athletes autonomy to, kind of give them enough rope to, hang themselves. Anyone at that level is like motivated enough to, yeah, to if they've gotten to that level, they know how to do it. So sometimes like giving people a little bit more freedom is actually the best thing you can do as a leader, especially if you're working with a group of motivated individuals.
Mm. If you were ever given the opportunity to be like I don't even call it team principal, general manager of a team, would you ever do it?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it. I mean, it's a hard. I think there's a lot of steps to get there. Maybe for like a junior team or something a little
Yeah.
bit more accessible. Um, but yeah, I think I've like experienced enough environments over the course of my career where I know what is, and I guess even now where I'm at in, in my day-to-day job at Wahoo is like I've seen different leadership styles and kind of what works. And I mean, I guess I also speak only from my own perspective in the sense that I'm, pretty self-motivated. So I know what works for me. I know there's also other individuals that like do need kind of a, sometimes like a little motivational speech to like get out the door and make it happen.
Mm.
But I think a lot of that is just creating like a culture of success. If you bring in people where everyone's like motivated to do their job or do the work, then it's really not hard to, get people to rally together and kind of get it done.
Has your source of motivation changed for doing hard things since when you first started this sport to now where you find yourself in sport, but also in like as a leader in business and a father of two and husband?
Um, I mean, I guess now it's my motivation is more like the clicking like clock. Like I know that the time is running out.
Mm.
I know that
You know
like,
your mortality.
the years of being able to like, break records or, set a new power number is like slowly going away.
Yeah.
Um, which like oddly, I'm still like somehow seeing like improvements. Um, so I think my motivation is like kind of just stems from, I'm not sure how much you follow like running, but Oregon, Steve Prefontaine was like a big kind of
Mm-hmm.
idol for I think a lot of Oregonians, and like to give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift. And while I don't give everything I have because to sport because I just the other circumstances of my life. I feel like it's more I think about that quote for myself, and it's more like using this, whether it's a gift that I have or, ability, um, making sure you maximize it because it's not going to be there
Forever.
forever. Maybe
Mm.
I'm talented in, a physiological cardiovascular sense, not in brain power. I think if you're like a physicist, like those skills stay with you for your whole life. And I think as an athlete, like, yeah, by the time you're late 30s, you start to see a decline in performance. So trying to just make sure that I get to experience everything that I want to while I'm still able to.
Yeah, it's actually been really encouraging to me in a weird way. So, just the way that my life and my past has panned out, for whatever reason, I seem to get along really well with people who are like 5 to 10 years older than me.
Hmm.
And it's been a great source of motivation and encouragement to see them, some of my closer, and I would even consider them mentors, some of them friends, to start to go through some of that realization of their mortality and shift in priorities. And, some of them very wealthy people now they're like, well, I used to really chase after the money, but now I realize, well, it's my impact or it's my time that I spend with my family or whatever. And it's given me pause to like really sit and where I am now and kind of decide what choices I want to make. But I hope that everybody goes through those times. But it's sad
Yeah.
because sometimes people don't. They're chasing that same thing until the day they die, and then they're on their deathbed and realize, oh wait, what was actually important?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, obviously with two young kids as well, like I realize that I don't want to be, missing soccer games or whatever sports they're playing because I'm off on a bike ride. And I've got a good buddy who lives just down the way from me who's he's in his 50s and he didn't pick up endurance sport until his late 30s. And he's just a monster. And I'm just like, do I really want to be like going to these races when I'm 50 years old and racing the masters category? And like, for this is his, I won't say career, but this is like his time right now.
Lifestyle, yeah.
And it's awesome to see it that at 50 years old, he's like absolutely crushing it. I'm like, man, I hope when I'm 50, I've got like a big beer belly and sitting on the couch, which, maybe I romanticize, which I don't, I think I'm enough of an athlete that I'll probably always want to like be
Be
active.
active, sure.
But there's also like this thought process of, and maybe it's some of it just like observing my dad who, raced. And then once he stopped, he, still stayed active, but it's like, cool, the casual athlete, like, hey, yeah, I can go do a century ride if I want, but I don't have to.
Yeah.
Where I would want to be fit enough to like go do those, adventures or, whatever,
Mm.
run a marathon at some point, but not need to do it. And I feel
Yeah.
like that's where I'm still at. And I think, I have quite a few friends who are at a similar point in their life where they're, retiring from professional sport, but I still see within them like they need to exercise.
Mm.
Um, I know all the listeners on this podcast are probably endurance athletes, but it really is like an addiction. Like I
100%.
need to at the moment, like, and I kind of in time would like, and I don't know if it's even possible or something I would want, but like to break that addiction of needing to exercise
Mm.
pretty much every day. I mean, at the moment, I'm not training for anything, which is like almost the worst because then I never rest. I'll do a
Yeah.
run or a ride every day. And they're always like, 30-minute run or a hour and a half bike ride. And you just get into this trend of like, I'm exercising every day. I'm not really getting better. I'm not getting worse. I'm just kind of in this like addictive, time of the year where I'm like, cool, I'm exercising enough to like get the dopamine hit, but not like
Yeah.
not resting, but not really improving.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I say this too, everybody has a different motivation or a different backstory. And I'm not saying that everyone is exactly this way, but with the world of endurance sport, oftentimes the people who are putting in the most time and energy into it, it's like you're running from something or you're trying to fill some type of a void. Um, Not always. And I think over time, like for me, I'll speak personally, that's what it was in the beginning, but it's become more of now like a lifestyle thing. And as my wife's pregnant and I'm coming into this new season of life, similar to you find yourself in, like I don't feel the need, like I have to, no matter what, get that training block in and that make sure I don't have under 5 minutes on every workout and hit every block or,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Um, but for me, as I've gotten a little bit older now, it's like, to be completely frank, it was like, oh, I don't want to ever get overweight. Like I had this
Yeah.
inner fear, like that's going to be it. So I was letting that drive me. And, I've had times actually where I'd spent less training and I started to lose weight. And I was like, oh, there's probably something wrong with me than if I'm overtraining, if I'm
Yeah.
losing weight after I quit.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different things. Yeah, all of that to just kind of say, like, I see what you're saying. It's a definite
Yeah.
shift in motivation.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of it as an athlete, like you really, whether you're, professional athlete or just a recreational athlete, like you also become so aware of how it feels to feel good.
Mm,
Not even if that's peak fitness, but just like you wake up in the morning, like, you've rested well, you're hydrated, you've etten well, and like you wake up and you're like, I just feel good.
yeah.
We just recently went to a long wedding. I woke up, it was over in Greece, and, way too much drinking, like a lot of, crappy food, no exercise. And I wake up every morning. I'm like, some people wake up like this every day. Like, and
Mm.
that's just like baseline. And I'm
And
like,
that's what feels good
that's,
to them or normal.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And, while I still like, enjoy going out and doing all that stuff, it's like, cool. I do that. But then I'm like, oh, I'm going to go for a run this morning, to go for a bike ride, and I'll like kind of reset.
Yeah.
Um, and I think just that, like that sense as an athlete that you get of like what it feels like to wake up and feel healthy is probably something that's somewhat, yeah, part of the addiction process of just like
Yeah.
feeling good.
Yeah. So, shifting gears a little bit because I was going through your Instagram to try to drum up some potential questions. I'm curious what the name, and I'm going to butcher this, but Sule Kangangi?
Kangangi. Yeah.
Kangangi? So the Kangangi, what
Yeah.
does that name mean to you?
Yeah. I mean, he's really like, I mean, to East African and Kenyan cycling, really like yeah, uh, like a trailblazer of cycling in East Africa. So I had raced with Sule on the road back in like 2015 or 16. There was a German team that kind of brought some East African riders to Europe to race on the road. Um, and oddly, in the world of cycling, like East Africans have never really kind of like cracked into the world of pro cycling the same way they have in ultra running. And so Sule, being from Kenya, like, spending time up in Iten, like, he saw all these world class marathon
Athletes.
runners. He's like, why can't this be cycling?
Mm,
I guess he really saw the barriers that were kind of in place for cycling. I mean, one, compared to running, it's really expensive. Equipment is, incredibly hard to come by in East Africa, and equipment in cycling triathlon plays a huge role in performance compared to, I mean, I know running now with super shoes, you can have to have them if you want to be successful.
sure.
Um, but you can go out and, run a marathon, and people can identify talent much easier in running than I think in cycling. Um, so yeah, he kind of had this idea of doing for cycling what, I don't know who did it for running back in the day with runners in East Africa, but really kind of making it creating a pathway for East African cyclists to make careers and lives out of professional cycling, which can't really be done in East Africa. You have to go to Europe or the US to kind of get, to be at the biggest races.
Mm,
Um, so we started this Team Amani, which is a professional cycling team now based out of Kenya, but they race all over the world. And Sule unfortunately died in 2023 at a race here in Vermont. He came out to the US for a block of racing and was staying at my house with a couple other teammates,
mm,
and yeah, had a crash and passed away. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly tragic kind of story. He was a father of 4 kids. Really a
wow.
pioneer of kind of this team, and this team has really gone on to a ton of success. And now not only do they have a gravel team, they have a women's team, they have a road team. It's really exploded and like kind of
Mm,
paved this pathway for East African cyclists to pursue a career in professional cycling. Um, yeah, and so he died at a race here in Vermont that I was at, and yeah, a race that a buddy runs, and it's always kind of been I mean, we spoke about mortality earlier. It's crazy that it was what, 3 years ago now, and like
yeah, barely.
things are forgotten pretty quickly. At the race this year, a gentleman, Lachlan Morton, came out who was also close with Sule. Sule was staying with Lachlan in Colorado prior to coming out here to Vermont. um, and I think it both really shook Lachlan and I when he died. A young, super motivated, healthy, like, inspiring athlete. Just like, when you die, it's like, of course, people are sad for a couple of weeks, a month, a year. His family obviously still, but the world just goes on. This
Mm,
year at the start line of Overland, I'm like, this means a lot to Lachlan and I to be here, like to
yeah,
have this notion or memory of him that this was his last race and all that. But the other 1,500 people on the start line, it's like
they had no
they don't
idea.
know. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we were able to pay tribute to him this year at the Vermont Overland, which meant a lot for us. And I think, to a degree, like, kind of help bring his memory back, kind of the forefront of, what he did and what he stood for and kind of the legacy that he's created.
Mm,
Um, And I think that's what's like most inspiring about him is that like he had this vision and started this thing that is, if he saw it what it is today, he would be like blown away.
Mm,
Um, I think sometimes when people pass away, things kind of slowly fade away into the abyss, and he was able to build something and create something that has
stood the
outlived
test of
him.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything in your life that you want to outlive you in the way that you do things?
Oh boy, my kids. I have a good buddy, and we speak about, I won't say death a lot, but like I'm 34, and of course I want to see my kids grow up.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I've lived a really awesome life. Like
Mm.
if I were to like, if I could, know that my kids would be healthy and taken care of and happy and not miss me or my wife.
Not
Um,
miss you.
yeah, but I also feel incredibly fortunate. I grew up, in Oregon, and like, didn't go on my first airplane until I was, I don't know, 14 or 15. And like since then I've like traveled the world on someone else's dime. I've seen like, I've been to every continent outside of Antarctica.
Antarctica.
Yeah, I've, made a living off of doing what I love, racing bikes. And that's like, I don't take for granted like the life that I've led up to this point. Of course, I know there's like going to be plenty of things in my life that I still look forward to, and
Sure.
kind of like dreams. Um, but that was something else that kind of really happened to me in 2019 when I ended my professional road cycling career. Was I didn't at that time, we didn't have kids, and I was like, geez, I'm 28 years old, and like I've already accomplished my life goal. Like racing the Tour de France. I did that. Like, what do I look forward to now?
Mm.
And of course, there's always other things to look forward to, especially having kids changes that perspective. Um, but at the same time, like if you were to tell me when I was 10 years old that this would be my life, I wouldn't have believed you.
Yeah. Mm. That's an amazing story, man, to be able to have that experience from such a young age. But that leaves you now with a tremendous amount of experience that you have literally and arguably two more lifetimes still to figure out like what the next move is. Do you ever I don't know if worry is the right word, but do you ever contemplate like are there other areas of life outside of endurance sport that you have a curiosity that you would want to step outside of more of the comfort zone? Because you talked about being the handyman. You like the challenge of doing something you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely have. I think having kids has definitely kind of I won't say put a pin in my pipe dreams, but it's definitely kind of paused like any dramatic
Shifts.
gamble of like, what I want to do next. Just like
Sure.
yeah, the consistency and like accountability of having a full-time job is definitely something nice to have at the moment. Because I am still racing, like there's still, awesome opportunities to travel the world and, go see new events and meet new people, which I'm still very much enjoying. But yeah, just living where we're at now, I do have this pipe dream of like seeing if we could do, whether it was, I don't know, a year, 2 years of like, I don't say fully self-sustaining, but like, we've got big gardens and we've got apple trees and,
Off the
grow
grid.
100 pounds of, yeah, not like I'm not a prepper, but
Maybe you
more
should
just
be.
to like, yeah, but more just to like, I mean, I guess to a degree we are preppers in the sense that we just like, we grow a lot of food during the growing season and then preserve it. So it's like, of course we only have apples only grow a certain time of
Mm,
year and potatoes and squash and, we can a bunch of stuff. Um,
that's amazing.
but really just to experience what that would be like, because I feel like, we're so fortunate in this day and age that you can go get, blueberries in January and, avocados
It's
whenever
always
you
there.
want.
Yeah.
It's pretty convenient. So to just like, I guess, gain an appreciation of, what life was like when it
Mm,
wasn't as convenient. I'm incredibly connected now to, the world via social media, the internet, which I think is a tremendous, resource that we have. Um,
but
but it's definitely, something that I would love to like say like, hey, can we go back in time, just to see what it was like,
mm,
what would it be like? We have quite a few neighbors that are, homesteaders. And I do always kind of admire that, yeah, that lifestyle. I'm sure it's hard and you probably miss some of the conveniences of, what we have, but it'd be worth a try just to gain some perspective.
I'm so glad you brought that up because in the beginning, when you were talking about the joy that is brought from, working with your hands just on your house, and now you're talking about gardening, it, I think one of the big reasons that our society is so absent, especially the younger generation, of this idea of like, well, what's my purpose? Like, I got to find my purpose, what it if you grew up in the late 1800s or any time prior to that, when it was very much more agrarian focused, you need to kind of, there's a certain number of things you have to be self sustaining for, growing certain pieces of food, getting your hands dirty in the garden. When you go out and plant a seed, water it, and watch the journey of certain different plants that only grow in certain times of the season, and then you bring that all the way to fruition by God's grace that it grows, and then you harvest that, to be able to take that food and put it in your mouth, and but have the entire backstory of all that's gone through that entire journey of life, it gives a lot of perspective, I think, and purpose to like who we are as
Yeah.
humans and what
Yeah.
really matters.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe like kind of, you asked me earlier, like why I enjoy that or why I, whether it's, and I think a lot of that like almost stems from sport. I think like as an athlete, like you are kind of the product of of the whole process.
Hmm.
Like you can wake up every day and like, cool, I'm going to like, do this training session. I'm going to take a nap, whatever it is. You kind of, you're the outcome of the work you put in. And that's the same
Hmm.
with like gardening. It's like if you don't weed the garden or you don't, water the garden, like it's not going to survive. And so like what you produce is really like a, yeah, a resemblance of like the work and the effort that you put into it, which is really cool. I mean, there's an Amish community just north of us, and I was driving up there the other day, and there was a kid out in like a pretty big field, like a lawn, but like one of those push mowers. He had a top hat and suspenders, and I'm like, that's his day, like his whole day. And I was like, but at the same time, we spoke about brush hogging. Like one of my favorite activities is brush hogging or mowing
Yeah, same.
because there's like a beginning and an end. And when you're done, you can't do more. It's like
Hmm.
it's done. It's like
Yeah.
it's the defined end. And I was like, that kid's probably going to end the day super satisfied. Like he spent 8 hours, pushing this, mechanical mower across this field. I know he's maybe 10 years old, but like he finishes the day and feels accomplished. And I feel like in our society today, there's like no end. It's
Yeah.
like I wake up every morning and I look at my phone. It's like there's 20 new emails or this many messages, or it's like there's no end to into the modern workday.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like previously there was like a distinct end, whether that's
Mm.
to the garden or the season. It's like once it's done, it's done. It's
Yeah.
on to the next thing. And I feel like for us, we're continually, you could essentially never stop working if you chose to.
Yeah, convenience can definitely, and efficiency can be can be the death of fulfillment in a lot of ways, I think. But it's a catch
Yeah.
22 because like you wouldn't have modern medicine in the way that you have it. There's other things you would
Yeah.
not have, but this insatiable desire for innovation. And I mean, I like a pro capitalism, but even capitalism in itself like will eventually kind of put us all in our grave, I think, because we're just
Yeah.
trying to find the absolute, how can you optimize everything till eventually, well, AI is doing everything for me. My robot's cooking my
Yeah.
food. All I have to do, it's like Wall-E. Like literally that movie was
Yeah.
kind of prophetic in a lot of ways because it's like
Yeah.
that's the path that we're on if we were not to stop, but it's really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I still think, and I think again, this kind of stems from sport. I like enjoy the fruits of my labor,
Mm,
and I think that's like, you find that in sport. And I find that in, we're coming up on winter here in Vermont. It's like, cool. I've got all of our wood stacked and put away. And like,
that's
it's
awesome.
a pain to do that. And I'm like cursing the whole time I'm splitting wood, stacking wood. I'm like, I've touched this freaking log 6 times to get it to the carport to where it's drying.
Yeah.
But I sure love like cuddling up next to that fire in the wintertime. You're like, oh yeah, I'm so glad that,
Yeah.
I put in the work to be able to enjoy this fire.
Yeah. Are you a religious person?
Not really, no.
You don't think so? Are you spiritual?
My wife and I were just talking about this. I mean, yeah, I'd say yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing what you and your wife talked about explicitly?
I mean, we were just I mean, we were just talking. I mean, I do think there's like connection with things. I mean, I think maybe it's more like karma, like putting good out and good coming back.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there is like a connection of that source. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I may pry a little further, do you believe
Yeah.
that there's like a creator force or something higher in that regard? Or is it, yeah, I guess that's the question.
I mean, that was kind of our question. I feel like it's, I mean, so I grew up going to church a little bit. My wife did a lot more. Um, I mean, I also, to a degree, have this like sense of like we know so much, but there's also so much we don't know. Like we know whether it's like when you look at whether it's biology or, astrophysics, like we know so much, but there's still so many questions. Thankfully where we're at here, like we have a beautiful view of the night sky and like there's so much out there. And like, cool, we know like the boundaries of that, but it's like, well, what's beyond that? And
Mm,
so, I mean, it just gets into like this deep conversation of like, what is this? I mean, I feel like, we, as athletes as well, like we compare ourselves to like machines, like, oh, like, my gas tank's half empty. And I feel like when we look at the universe, we kind of like take that same concept, like we only know what we know.
mm.
Um, and sometimes it just becomes like too daunting. And so I guess maybe I just like take the approach of like trying to be, you know, a good person. And maybe like there's like, Christian values within that. Um,
Definitely. Yeah.
but like, just being a good human, being honest, being, not stealing, not lying, not taking advantage of things, caring for other people. I think there's a lot of, yeah, crossover values that I, align with. Um, but yeah, I mean, I just, it's all very, you know,
Humans
it's a
make it
big
complicated.
question.
Humans make it
Yeah.
complicated. I don't think it really is that complicated, to be honest. Because like what you're describing, this is my thought and observation. It's like those are all biblical concepts that you're talking about. They're
Yeah.
all concepts for if you want to sum it or simplify it down to like what love is. And as you were talking about gardening, when you're talking about the appreciation for the things you do with your hands, and there's these different verticals that we see, like our mental life, spiritual life, physical life. Um, whatever it is. There's a lot of these like cross parallels where you can look and see like, oh, this is related to that, that's related to that. And I'm super fascinated with when I was younger, for whatever reason, I really liked laying in bed at night and kind of doing what you were saying, like, we're here, but then try to zoom out here. And then, you're trying to like wrap your head around these bigger out there concepts. And it's like the brain just kind of like misfires and you're like, "Meh," and it
Yeah.
doesn't go anywhere. And you're
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
can't understand it. But there's peace
Yeah.
in knowing, like, for at least for me,
Yeah.
it's like I can go outside and it's going to snow in Vermont a lot this year, but you're never going to see a snowman just appear out because of the snowflakes
Yeah.
fall. And it's like
Yeah.
our bodies
Yeah. I
really
mean, I
make
guess maybe to like answer that question slightly with maybe more direction, like I guess I would say I don't believe in like a heaven or an afterlife. And I feel like that's like why, I mean, maybe some, having experiences like, being close to, to Sule before he died
it.
and like leaving an impact here with those. I mean, like I said, everything's forgotten. And maybe that's like why, trying to live my life to the fullest, like this is this is the
This
opportunity
is
we get.
it.
So making sure you enjoy it. Like, I feel like sometimes I don't say a cop out being like, oh, I can like just kind of like flounder through this life because the afterlife will be better.
Mm.
Like, enjoy this because it's like, it's really finite as well. It's incredibly fleeting. And I think, as you said, I've got, potentially two of my lives still remaining, which, as you'll find out with kids, it goes super fast. Like
Yeah.
it's incredible how fast life goes. I feel like there's times, as I said, I spent my mid 20s not knowing what I did with my day.
Mm.
Like my days now, like they go by like minutes.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, it's already like it's how is it already another Friday?
Yeah.
It's like making the most of it. I think that's I guess maybe my like guiding light in life is like make sure you enjoy life. And we're incredibly busy here at our place, like in a good way. It's like,
Yeah.
we don't have a TV at our house, and I'm like, we wouldn't have time for TV because we're gardening, we're playing outside, we've got, this old farmhouse, always need like the laundry list of things to do never ends. It's more just like taking time away from the projects to, I don't know, go camping or, go down to the lake and go swimming.
Mm.
That kind of, yeah, to remind ourselves that like, hey, you can enjoy things as well.
Yeah. Mm. I really like the way that you have explained to me and shown me just the different facets of your life. It's funny because it reminds me of someone like of faith in a lot of ways, because
Yeah.
it's like a lot of these concepts like you're talking about, they are rooted in just like loving others, growing a garden, to building your own stuff. Like, I really admire that. I hope that maybe I'll be able to have something similar when I get to your place in life and having two daughters and a wife and stuff like that. Canning, especially. I love doing that kind of stuff. It's so fun for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like my wife, like even yesterday, I came home in the afternoon and like I could just smell the vinegar and she was canning more. And I'm like, Gretchen, we have so many pickles and dilly beans. So like we can't,
You
but
never
like,
know,
I guess
honey.
that's the other, yeah. I mean, I guess that's also the beautiful thing about Vermont is like it is still like a step back in time. Like
Mm,
whether it's like the barter system or like, if someone invites us over for dinner, we invite someone over here, like you never show up empty handed. It's like you don't bring a gift, but like you bring, homemade jam or beans or, bring a carton of eggs if you've got chickens and like that whole like exchange of like goods is still really strong. We like our neighbors came and picked apples, so they dropped off manure. It's like just this transaction of what you have, which I really love, where it's like it's an exchange of goods, but it's not an exchange of money.
mm.
Um, which is a cool like society to be a part of.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, our world is super fragile. It's like if a couple key power plants go down or a couple key server farms, it's like you lose that instant social media connection. You walk out your front door and it's like, who wants to trade eggs for this? And then like that's literally
Yeah.
what it goes back to pretty quick. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's one thing. I mean, by no means do I want the world to crumble, but
No,
like
of course
I
not.
do I do feel like, oh, cool, we'd be in a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
If things went south, like, we've got kind of the basics covered. I'm sure we'd run out of pickles
Some.
pretty quickly,
Yeah.
but yeah, we'd make do for a little
Yeah.
while.
It's amazing what little you can survive on too.
It's
So
cool.
like last couple of questions here. These are pretty deep, so I may not ask both of them. So we'll see. I've been kind of chewing on which one to ask you first. But this first one is: what is something difficult that you are going through that most people don't often see or wouldn't see?
Oh boy. I think it's probably when to end racing.
Mm,
I think that's like something that I don't. I'd say, yeah. I guess I would say I struggle with like when to close this chapter of my life. Because it really is I guess what you see from the outside social media, it's like, oh, cool. Like Ian's, he's going to cool places. He's doing well in races. He's got awesome equipment, and which is all fantastic. But there's like a lot of work behind the scenes, and as I said, with kids, like there's only so many hours in the day, and having a full-time job plus like kind of I'll say a side job, but like racing's kind of a secondary job.
sure.
Um, well, and then there's also the training side, which is like a third job. Um, and knowing that like, yeah, there's times when like, on weekends, I know the kids are going to be home all day, but it's like, yeah, I finally have time to go for a longer ride, or even it's like traveling to a race. And it's really this hard mental kind of, I'm starting to plan my next year's kind of schedule. And, there's opportunities to go to Australia and Japan and Chile. And it's like, sometimes I have to say no to those, which
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard. And, of
You're
course, in the
torn.
moment, it's easy to say yes, but it's like once you're there, like, I wish I was home with my kids. And I
Mm,
think that's something I really struggle with, like, because I know that both moments are like, essentially not there forever. My kids aren't going to be young forever, and the opportunities to travel to these awesome places to race a bike or ride a bike, they aren't going to last forever.
mm.
Um, so I feel like I'm like kind of like spinning a bunch of plates. I'm like everything's still spinning and standing, but it's like I feel like I'm always on the edge of like going too far one way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and thankfully my wife's incredibly supportive of she also like met me as I was doing this bike racing thing, so she kind of understands what
Yeah.
I do and kind of what it looks like. But just with a growing family, it becomes harder. Especially our
Mm,
3.5-year-old now. Like she's very aware when I'm gone now. Is
mm.
where when she was younger, it's like, oh, she doesn't really
Yeah.
there's no
Doesn't click.
difference between me being home. Well, I mean, there's a difference, but like
Yeah.
now she's like, Daddy, I miss you. I'm like, oh, it's just like a dagger
Yeah.
to the heart.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I'll say, yeah, I'd say it's a struggle and like a balance that I'm trying to find. Um, Equally, there's also tons of opportunities that come to my family because I'm racing bikes. We got to
Yeah.
go to Scotland as a whole family this year for a week and stay in a castle. And it's like, what a cool memory that is for my kids.
Yeah. No kidding.
Um, but with that also comes other events that they don't come to, and I'm doing it by myself.
Beautiful, man. That's a great answer. So I'm gonna do this then for your final question. So your daughters are 3.5 and what?
1.5. Yeah.
Okay. So here's what we're gonna do. I want you to give a message to your 10-year-old daughters, okay, when they get to 10, of something you want
Oh
them
boy.
to absolutely know when they get to that age. And this podcast, I will be doing it hopefully through then. So I will try to make myself, I'm going to put it in my calendar and we'll send
Yeah.
it to you then. But
Oh
what's something you
boy.
would tell them?
Um, oh goodness.
No rush. Take your
Um,
time.
yeah. What would I tell my daughters? And I would say follow your heart, but that's kind of too simple.
They can go watch Disney.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just kidding.
I don't know. I think something else that you know, would hope to instill in my daughters is to like when you show up for something, like really show up for it. Like be present in what you're doing. And that's not just like a distraction of, like if you're going to commit to something, like do it. Um, I think I see a lot of that in younger folks today is like they're kind of like dabbling in things like, oh, like I kind of want to be a, pro athlete or I kind of want to do this, but like not committing. Um, and I think that like I hope that I can show them that, and whether that's sports or music or theater or whatever it is, like if you're going to do something, like go all in, like put your heart and soul into it. Hopefully they find something that they can do that um, with. But I think that's been like kind of the greatest lesson in my life was like committing to something and kind of being responsible for the success or the failures of that, and like not just quitting when the going gets tough. I think that
Mm.
that's I don't know. I think that's what comes to mind to tell them is like, hey, if you're going to do it, go all in. Because you also learn a lot. I also had a couple, courses at a junior college. I never went to college, but I think like the education that I got has been through, you know, committing to something through like the good and the bad times of it.
Mm. Beautifully said, man. So 3.5-year-old is your oldest right now. So in March of
Yes.
7 years from now, or I guess six, yeah, 6.5 years from now in March, hopefully we'll get to send
Yeah.
that video to you and you can show
We'll
it to
see.
him.
We'll see. Yeah. It'll probably be completely different by then. But
It's
yeah, I
okay.
mean, I guess I would just know that I love them unconditionally. I mean, my youngest daughter Ingrid, because she's speaking now, like, I just tell her that I'm always in her heart. I'm always, we always love her, whether I'm, in the house or 1,000 miles away.
Oh, beautiful, man. Well, Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me and yeah, share a lot. We covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate you being
Yeah,
vulnerable and being willing to share stuff that's along with your life, bike racing and whatnot, but stuff that's a little bit different. So I really appreciate that.
I appreciate it too. Thanks so much, Seth.
What a great conversation with Ian. Thank you so much to him for coming on and sharing and answering in the way that he did. Really do appreciate taking the time to ask some of the deep questions, or excuse me, receive answers for some of the deep questions. Um, yeah, really good conversation. I think something that everybody should hopefully take away from this one in his final question there, when I asked him about what he would tell his daughters when they get a little bit older, he really said to just go all in. So whatever you choose to set your hand to, make sure to do it in the best way with the most effort that you potentially can do. As long as you do your best, that's all that really matters. So thanks for being here. Check out the show notes and description for anything that is there that you may have missed or want to check out. Yeah, try to make these beginnings and endings of the podcast a little more informal. But as you can tell, because it's not super rehearsed, I kind of fumble a little bit. But I'm trying to be more authentic in that way. So thanks for being here, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.